Hello, BookTube. Well, it's a bleak and barren Sunday here at Hyde Cottage. For those of you who might be new to the channel, that's my whiny reference for Sundays when there is no mail, when I get no books in the mail. And it's made bleaker and barrener by the fact that not only is tomorrow a federal holiday in which I get no mail, but also this Sunday was preceded by mail doldrums. Days in a row where the mail haul was limp, weak, thin. Uh, I'm in need of a big, boisterous Steve mail haul, and I'm hoping that will happen next week. We're right in the time for it. Uh, but in the meantime, to console myself today, I'm doing this a bit late because I've been sort of blah all day, and this I found a tag to console myself, and it gets right at the heart of the reason why I've been so blah all day. I saw it on Mrs. Hembry Reads, and it's called "It's Not Fall" book tag, uh, which she created in response to the fact that BookTube is all about uh, people loving the fall, loving the fact that it's October, loving the proximity to Halloween and all the the fusillade of holidays that come up. And she wanted to point out that in the southern hemisphere, that's not the case. The seasons are a little different. They do things a little differently there. And so she made this book tag, the "It's Not Fall" book tag, and I was originally attracted to it because it's not fall either here in Boston. I mentioned this yesterday. It's even worse today. It's one of the reasons why the day has been so blah because it's 95% humidity under a leaden, sunless sky. It's not cold. It's not even cool. So the humidity really tells. You have to have a fan on you at all times. You go outside, you come back drenched in goo. It's I've heard many people, even in this last week, who have moved to California and in one case Arizona, and they're astonished at the difference that's made by a warm or normal day, an 80-degree Fahrenheit day, if there's no humidity at all. They're astonished by the change. I've had more than one person this week comment either to me or just out loud, just for the world, that the absence of humidity actually makes that weather bearable, and that humidity, high humidity, makes it unbearable. And I believe that. God, today has just been, it saps your will to do anything. Uh, but so that's the reason that I was originally drawn to the "It's Not Fall" tag, because it's not fall. It's almost October 10th, and it's summer weather. Doesn't feel like autumn at all. It just looks like autumn. But then when I saw the tag, when I read through it, I was even more attracted to it because the questions are great. So we're going to jump right into it here with the first one, which is, where are you from? There's a lot of scholarly disagreement on that point. Am I from Nashua, New Hampshire? Am I from Keokuk, Iowa? Am I from right here in Massachusetts? Who knows? But on this question, I always revert to a favorite motto of an old friend of mine, which is, "My homeland is my home." So I'm going to, for purposes of navigation here, I'm going to use Boston as a reference for all of these things. So I'm from Boston. Question number two is, a book written by an author from your country. I'm perfectly willing to consider Boston a country. I might stretch it by going as far west as Worcester, but no, the other half of the state, oh please. I've heard people live there, but I've seen no scientific proof of it. But the book that I chose this time around is a 1942 work, big thing, of nonfiction, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, by Samuel Eliot Morison. A weird, cranky, eccentric, brilliant writer. Oh, such a prose stylist, who had an amazing life. In addition to writing an amazing bookcase full of books, Admiral of the Ocean Sea is his big biography of Christopher Columbus, which made it all the more apropos for this weekend since it's Columbus Day weekend. Columbus is the reason I won't be getting any mail tomorrow. Uh, and it's fantastic. Columbus has, of course, been the subject of 80 million biographies, and I've read a lot of them. I think his life is fascinating. I wish that Samuel Eliot Morison was the subject of a big new biography. That would be great, because his own life is utterly fascinating. A historian who went to war in World War II and saw action and reached the rank of rear admiral on the back of being a historian instead of commanding man in battle. An amazing thing that I think has no equal in American history. And all for the Roosevelt administration's desire to have a smart working historian in on what they knew was history making things. I would love a nice 800-page biography of him. I think it would be great. Good luck getting the family to agree, but big, great biographies have been written without that, so it's possible. But anyway, the answer to the question is Admiral of the Ocean Sea, which I heartily recommend if you're looking for a biography of Christopher Columbus. In the 21st century, nobody is, but if you are, it's a great book. It's a fantastic read. Question number 3 is a classic children's book from your country, and that is going to be Robert McCloskey's "Make Way for Ducklings," which, if you've ever been to Boston, I'm sure you've been assaulted with it. You'll know it anyway. It's a classic children's book, also from 1942 or 1941, thereabouts, I think, about a family of ducks that makes their home on an island in the on a pond in Boston, and we get. It's just a simple story. It's a very simple story about the mother duckling and the mother duck and her ducklings making their way across the city. But we get all sorts of glimpses of a Boston that no longer exists. We get all sorts of what once were cultural stereotypes, like the enormous beat cop with a baton. Good luck carrying a baton around your wrist as a cop today. And the swan boats that are still a marvelous feature of walking around in Boston on a nice summer day. I don't think I need to recommend Make Way for Ducklings to any. I'm pretty sure you all know about it. If you don't know about it and you want a delightful reading experience, it's a delightful reading experience. Just let me know if you want me to send you a copy. I see probably. Well, I was going to say in my used book peregrinations around Greater Boston, I see probably 50 copies a week, but I don't make those peregrinations anymore. I am on round-the-clock puppy duty. But I can certainly find you a copy, is what I'm trying to say. There's absolutely no reason for you to go on, wherever, Abe or A Libris, and buy something for $10 when I can mail it to you, and would be happy to do so. So let's see. Question number 4. A book from your country that you were forced to read in school. This would be, the one I chose, there were a few, is Song of Hiawatha by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I was forced to read it, and I ended up loving it, but not in school. I came back to Longfellow and everybody else much later. And I just love Longfellow. I think his poetry is fantastic. I don't know... I mean, I guess I do know. Since the Beats and the modernist movement, there's no way that poets like Tennyson or Longfellow are ever going to come back into favor. And that's a shame. Tennyson, Longfellow, Scott, these poems are great. And I think if someone were to see one now, they would think of it as a museum piece. A long, formally structured verse narrative that tells a story and has a beginning, middle, and an end, and is not personal to the author. You don't learn anything about the author in the course of the poem. Who writes like that anymore? Who writes poetry like that? If you know somebody, if you know modern poets that still keep any vestige of that tradition alive, I'd love to hear about it. The first thing that comes to mind is Omeros by Derek Walcott, which I love, but there aren't many poets like that. But anyway, again, I know this is a long shot, but again, I actually recommend the Song of Hiawatha and all of Longfellow. If you ever find one of those, those old, grandmother's attic hardcover collected works of Longfellow at a yard sale or a charity shop for cheap, allow me to lodge a little voice in your head that says, give it a try. You have nothing to lose. Give it a try. It's a different kind of poetry. It's what I think is an extinct kind of poetry. But all the more interesting for that, and you never know. It could come back. But anyway, question number 5. A book representing something that frustrates you about your country. And there are many, of course. Boston is imperfect like any other city. But Boston has a particular shadow hanging over it, and it's had that shadow for a long time. And that's racism. Boston has in the past when it was interconnected enclaves of ethnic groups, it had a pronounced reputation for racism, and that bothers me because of a point that I'll be getting to later in the tag, which is that Boston also has an impressive track record of fighting racism. But that element of it has always bothered me, and of course, it in the modern era, it never came to a worse head than the Boston busing crisis, which a lot of you won't won't maybe know the details of it, but there's a great book on the subject of forced integration of Boston schools, and that book is Common Ground by J. Anthony Lucas, a massive bestseller that I think is still in print. I'm pretty sure that it's still assigned in schools, which is the way to stay in print, and it's an incredible, sometimes tough, but a very engrossing read, and it pulls in. It's the story of three families, and they are marvelously portrayed. But it pulls in all the major personalities of the time, politicians, entertainers, sports figures, and it squarely looks at the subject of Boston racism. It couldn't help but do that, and I love it. I thought it was fantastic. I predicted that it would win every award that wasn't nailed down, and it did. And it's every bit as good reading today. So I recommend. This whole list is recommendations. Question number 6 is a book with weather similar to your hometown. The very first thing that came to mind was Dune, but I'm going to skip the question because I'm not in the mood to talk about the weather in Boston on October 6th or 7th or 8th under a cloudy sky. It should be actually chilly here in Boston. It's crazy that it's 81 degrees with 90% humidity. That's crazy. It's the new normal, but it still feels crazy. It feels crazy to think that we might not get down into a daytime average temperature of 65 in the whole course of October. The idea of waiting for a couple of weeks in January to have actual winter weather is very depressing. So I'm going to skip this question. Question number 7, a book with a cultural celebration that you feel you miss out on. A cultural celebration connected with your home country, which in this case would be Boston. And it's a great book, but it's a Boston that I have had almost no contact with directly in a personal way. I've come into contact with it through knowing other people. It's The Proper Bostonians by Cleveland Amory, a great old book about the old moneyed upper class of Boston, the famous Boston Brahmin class that made Boston, put it on the map, did a lot of incredible groundbreaking work. It's easy to mock it now, but the Brahmins, in addition to being stuck up and wealthy and exclusive, were also hardworking on behalf of the government, on behalf of the city, on behalf of the people, and on behalf of the sciences and the arts. So they have an amazing track record. That sounds very weighty and very, very boring. Nothing like that is in The Proper Bostonians. The Proper Bostonians is just a marvelous snapshot of an era done by a humorist. So you definitely feel that throughout the book. There's a twinkle in the eye of the prose from start to finish. So I highly recommend. I don't know that you'd ever encountered a copy if you aren't in Boston. But if you do, and you're interested in my lovely old gal, feel free. Question number 8. A book originally written in your first language. There aren't any. My first language was a combination of body gestures, shoulder posture, head posture, sense, and urine. My first language was dog. Dogs don't make books. They don't write. They don't have literary culture. So there aren't any books in my original language. And I am still fluent in that language. When we do SteveCon in 2018, if we're walking through Boston and we encounter a strange dog, I will happily demonstrate. They're always surprised at first, and then they go nuts. And I do too. So, question number 9. A book depicting a cultural celebration or festival that you love. Well, it's a little melancholy because Boston as a whole, just as a whole city, whole greater Boston area is gentrifying. So a lot of the smaller regional festivals and celebrations that used to characterize it throughout the whole year are more and more museum pieces. Fewer and fewer people actually care about them. Fewer and fewer people actually do them. They look more and more benighted. I think that's a shame. Even when they are benighted, I know I'm going to miss them when they disappear. And there's a book. We talk about one of those enclaves. One of those enclaves was a bent angle of alphabetical streets leading to the bay called South Boston that used to be, once upon a time, a heavily working-class Irish neighborhood. And it was dotted with Catholic schools, and it was dotted with Catholic churches. and there was the water right there at the end of the street, right there at the end of Broadway. And there's a book. I don't think it's in print anymore. It's amazing. If every neighborhood in the world had such a book, what a rich library that would be. It's That Old Gang of Mine by Patrick Loftus. I think it's probably 30 years old, maybe 40 years old. And it's all about South Boston. It's about a South Boston that at the time that Patrick wrote it was very much still alive. And you can see it when you read the book. It breaks your heart if you're me. It breaks your heart because you can see in the people that he talks to and his own writing that the thought is not crossing anyone's mind that that world might someday soon disappear. That a lot of the people in the book might live long enough to see it gone. And it has almost completely disappeared. And that's a shame. I'm sure that it's the Boston Irish Catholic aren't the only people to moan about that. The Boston enclaves of all types get to look at their old hometown, their old enclave, and say, it's a shame that it's gone, because it largely is. The world their grandparents knew when they first got here is largely gone. But That Old Gang of Mine really brings it back. I don't know. I don't think anybody that's listening to me is going to be interested in the minutia of South Boston, but that's the book if you are. Oh my. And question number 10, something you wish the rest of the world understood about your culture. And that's a point that I make to people sometimes. I don't stress it so much anymore. I don't want to be heavy-handed about it. But if you look at Boston, at American history, military, cultural, musical, philosophical, rhetorical, publishing, science, health, medicine, art, religion, commerce, if you look at the whole weft of American society, one factor starts to jump out at you, which is how much of it runs through Boston. An enormous amount of it runs through Boston. You might think New